The title is
When standards obstruct.
When Standards Obstruct. Well, we all know quite a few examples of that. Just a red light, that's a standard, and it's obstructing you from going any further. But we need that. We agree with that usually, and we agree with seatbelts in most cases. There might be a few people that just refuse to do that, but usually people see the importance of doing it. But it obstructs you because you can't just reach in the back seat with a seatbelt on. There's some kind of obstruction going on in every standard. But when a standard obstructs in a way that is unhelpful, and I'm going to talk about that. When standards obstruct, when you set up standards, one of the teachings in the Buddha's Dharma is don't set up standards. It's not saying don't obey standards or don't follow standards that are strong convention that actually might even make sense to you or be about your safety, all the other things that could apply. But what happens is we start to use a standard, maybe a standard that we can comply with, or we can go along with, that it's just obvious that we should do that. We would expect everybody else to do the same thing. You have no idea what it's like to be in someone else's karma, or the old fashioned word is walking somebody else's moccasins or something like that. We have no idea what that's like, but each person needs to observe that situation for themselves. Because if you just use a standard, you just obey the standard or align yourself with the standard, it's not that won't help you in some way, but if it's happening in a way that interferes or obstructs something that needs to occur. When I say needs to occur, we all kind of agree that we need to have stoplights, otherwise the traffic situations go pretty confusing. But we want to control, so we're safe. This is about the self-centered part of consciousness that wants to have a say-so, wants to control. When that gets way out of hand, we have the kind of political things that are happening today. Somebody wants to control everybody else. One person, 2 people, 8 people want to control everyone else, and they're doing a pretty good job of it right now. But it's causes and conditions. Those things arise out of causes and conditions. There's no one person, one situation, one consciousness aligned with a particular individual that is at cause. Not that a particular person didn't invent something, or a particular person didn't write something. But they didn't do that without the language that came way before them. They didn't do it without all of the structures, the chemistry, the mathematics. It's dependently arisen. And it's not just a simple form of dependent origination. It's the kind you cannot see. You cannot see the beginning of this because there isn't one. If you think there is, that's more about trying to find out what the right standard is. So these are to be observed. When we really get into trouble is when we start to blame others for how we feel, or blame others for any number of things, and try to control them or accuse them or judge them or whatever kind of chaos can come out of that. It's powerful. It obstructs. It obstructs our wisdom, and it produces a lot of anger, passion, aggression, ignorance, passion, aggression, and anger, hope and fear, etc. We could ask, well, how would you know what to observe and what to just maybe even obey, like a stoplight? There are times when you wouldn't obey a stop signal. If you were in a rush, you needed to get somewhere, you certainly would look this way and that way, but if nothing was coming, you'd go through that red light. And if you haven't done that, then I'd be very surprised if you haven't at times looked at the situation and without even particularly analyzing, just knowing this is a time when that standard does not apply. That's happening everywhere all the time in your life, in the life of those 3 feet away from you and 3 miles away from you. I'm not saying we shouldn't have laws. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have precepts, but the precepts are to be observed. This is why this is emphasized rather than obeyed. Not that some traditions don't align themselves with it in such a way that they obey. If they're doing that, then they should go ahead and keep doing that, I guess. I can continue to talk about this because I have a fair amount to say. But I'm also happy to respond to questions. Yashin,
Bowing. Can we obstruct anything which needs to occur on the spiritual path? Bowing.
can you obstruct it?
Yes.
Well, the way you put it, probably not if it needs to occur. You're talking about dependent origination. It's like it's a whole lot. There's a whole lot that's in front of us. We can see this and we can control it. But there's a whole lot we can't control. You can't even control your digestive tract. You can't just tell yourself what to, you can't control your emotions. You can't just say, well, I think I'll feel this way. Well, I'm tired of feeling that way. We have no say-so about that. And very little. Even meditation practice, if you're trying to feel better, is probably not going to work if it's functioning as a cover-up rather than awareness about what is happening. Awareness about what is happening means that you are receiving whatever is showing up without comment. Leaves fall from the tree. You don't hate one leaf and love the other leaf. Fish in a pond, you don't pick and choose. An old teaching goes back hundreds of years. You just observe it so that if you do need to move into that situation or walk away from that situation or ignore it, or maybe not be particularly focused on it, then it will be obvious. It'll be, as I often say, it'll be choiceless for you what to do. Don't make decisions. In fact, in fiction, if you see what this is completely, totally, you're no longer clueless about anything at all. This doesn't mean, you know what temperature it's going to be tomorrow. I don't mean that. But you won't make decisions because you're so clear about what's coming and going in your mind stream and the mind stream of the people around you or the situations you're in, that you just know what to do next because you're working for the benefit of others. And if you're doing that, if you're not just a self-centered oligarch over here trying to get your way, stop some emotions, fluff up other emotions or whatever. If you're not doing that, if it's in the service of others, then you'll see what to do next. And you'll also see when to mind your own business. That's very difficult to do if you're working out of some kind of social, cultural, or ethical standard, that just to have the protection of the standard, what's right. We need to know what's right and what's wrong. There are whole teachings all over Buddhism about right conduct. I'm happy to respond to questions about that, but you better know what you're talking about. When I say talking, you better know what you're seeing. And be very clear about what you're seeing, not just, well, we have to do this, we have to do that. When it says the first grave precepts says don't kill. That's just to bring your mind to the very act of killing. You cannot help but kill. You cannot help. What's the second one? Don't bullshit anybody. You can't help but do that. You cannot help, but it might take you years of practice to realize that every time you open your mouth, there's some kind of untruth going on there, relatively, because we are hooked on relative truth, hope and fear, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth. Question? Anyone can ask a question, but Jishin.
Jacob Bowing.
Go ahead.
While we are doing a Samu task, are we always protected against the daughters of Mara?
That's a pretty interesting question. Okay, well, I'm going to repeat that because I know people didn't hear you. While we are doing a Samu task, a work task, like in the monastery, somebody says, polish the ceiling. And you get up there, start polishing the ceiling. So are we protected from the daughters of Mara? Mozuko, you want to answer that? You're a monk.
Well, the first thing that comes up for me with Daughters of Mara is temptation.
He has a point if you take it that direction.
I mean, I've been doing a work task at times and been tempted to just not complete it, so
Yeah, but did you stop?
I think I have.
Well, maybe he didn't.
So the daughters won, I guess.
You have further questions for her? So if I follow what you're saying, not to make light of what you're saying, because it's a good question. I don't know if I would go so far as to say protected, but there's something happening there. Anytime you're working as a practitioner, working with the structure of the Sangha, of the Sangha and of the monastery, there's going to be some kind of protection happening there, just like you have some kind of protection just by sitting down, practicing meditation. Some of that is happening, but the fundamental protection is to see what this is yourself fundamentally, so you have no doubts about it. You don't look for right and wrong anymore. You are not seduced by the culture that you live in. You don't ignore it either, but you're not seduced into thinking you have to line yourself with what a bunch of people think who believe their thoughts. You follow me? Did I get close to what you were looking for?
Yes. I guess second question is like, does that mean like, so it's also, well, so there's time and circumstance also where it's not falling into Mara?
Falling into delusion or into self-deception.
So it could be like not finishing a Samu task and it would be not samsaric.
I wouldn't get too heavy. I wouldn't wind around that too many times with the fourth skandha. Follow me? I wouldn't overthink that situation, because if you do too much calculating, figuring, concluding, excluding, and so on, it just creates more circularity, which samsara loves that, and ego eats it up. So better to not know that. You're welcome, sir.
So bowing, looking at conduct or the precepts.
Yes.
It seems like a community or a teacher might tighten up on that under the guise of protection. And I want to ask about, when is it protection and when is it control?
It could be a little of each. So maybe you could come up with I can come up with a few examples, but it might be good for you to bring about the ones that are creating the question.
Bowing. You said that your students are, I can't remember if you called us mavericks or renegades or people that don't particularly want to listen to people.
Yes,
A bunch of very individuals.
most of them. They don't want to follow forms, but they want to train their mind, and they're inspired by the teachings of the Buddha, and they're here. But they may have tried out this way or that way, and it's just too tight, too controlling, too parental. And there's a need for that. And some people need that kind of training. Other people do not. Go ahead.
So in a sense, this is speculation, but I feel like a lot of us wouldn't last in another community. We'd be kicked out for our bad attitudes or stuff we can't change. And is the protection and the control situational?
It's like, the example that comes to mind is the Suzuki Roshi once talked about training the mind. And he said, you need to, and he has a very strong commentary on control. He says something to the effect that give your mind like a cow, a big pasture, so it can wander around lots of room. So form, but not so tight and so strong that the cow or the mind gets freaked out and gets controlled. So it brings about more self-centeredness, more passion, aggression, and ignorance, more warfare, more structural, more fighting against the form. Is that the area you're looking at? So, and the way I do work with this is each person individually. I try to look at each person's situation, and I'm not saying I'm always right or correct or I'm doing the best thing. So some people have a lot more room than others. Not that I'm saying, oh, I can give this person a lot of room to come and go, but this person over here has got to be really tight. I'm not saying it that way. I'm just saying if people are here in the monastery, especially if they're monks or if they have lay precepts, they're serious about this. But the way in which they show up as practitioners may not, I don't have a standard for this. That doesn't mean that if I don't see something about the way you seem to be deceiving yourself, but with your permission, if I have your permission to function as your teacher, I might come and turn up the heat in that area on you, actually for you. More?
Shadow bowing. Is one person's obstruction another person's support?
Of course. Yes, very much so. Do you have an example of that? Not personal names or anything like that, but do you have something that?
Shadow bowing. Yeah, I've been reflecting on this a lot. Like, I feel like a lot of people in this community have been treated very badly in their life, but like someone who hasn't, it just hasn't been exposed to that just by circumstance, better upbringing or something
Yes.
like that. It's not that they're good and we're bad, but they might need a different kind of support.
That's causes and conditions. Everyone is so different. The karma that you came here with, that I come here with, I often say, don't miss your life. In other words, don't have such strong standards that you don't even receive the karma that needs to show up in your mind stream because you're too busy obeying some kind of a standard that will cause you to lose the rest of your life because all of your energy is going into obeying something. Could be a person, could be a standard, could be a law. Probably won't be a stop sign, but it's that kind of a structure. It gets so tight that there is no right and wrong, and you'll even be upset with anybody else that's not doing that. Society and culture is full of ethics is just full of all kinds of things like that make some sense, but not when you clamp down on someone and just say they have to live this way. This is why I could go on and on, but I think that's good enough. Further questions? No, sir.
Yoka Bowing, Ath from the UK asks, are feelings standards? Bowing.
Feelings have a basis in relative truth. It seems that this caused that, but you can't find the first cause for the feeling. Quite often the feeling is there, like something is sitting around the corner that you don't even know it's there. So it takes something out here to trigger it so that comes out. And quite often we have, what's the old saying, mountain out of a molehill. We have there's some situation where someone's really overreacting to something that was just a trigger. It wasn't the actual feeling, but it is a memory of something you have not looked at. So now you're bringing it out. And one of the ways of looking at something is to think something else caused it, but it didn't. But you can't talk yourself out of it. Logic, reason, the four skandha thinking process will not help you there. It might help you if you're trying to do cognitive behavioral therapy, which maybe you need to do, or some other structural way of working with it. But the fundamental working with consciousness in that area, did I get close? Is it Ath?
Shadow bowing. You had touched earlier on how we can't really just change how we feel, but there are a couple of things that sort of work like that. I'm thinking of drugs or music, like we can manipulate that a little bit.
Yeah, play music and you'll feel better. Or take drugs and you're taking your chances with drugs. Depends on the drug. Yes.
Bowing. And so I'm curious about when that becomes an obstruction, like when that kind of affecting how we feel becomes an obstruction.
Well, it's there again, it's about consciousness. Not so much about right and wrong. If you live your whole life just playing a lot of music and you never train your mind at all, other than the kind of training you get just by being alive, but you're always trying to get something, gain something, arrive at something, create something, not wrong. It's just circles. And you'll be back over and over and over again. Maybe you want to come back. Maybe nothing comes back. Maybe that's an illusion too. But if you want to see what this is, and usually anybody that's here listening to this particular talk or studying this material, whether you're doing it now or tomorrow night or next week or with some other person, some other teacher, some other sangha, does not matter. Doesn't matter. What matters is what's the intention. You want to see what this is? You're going to have to look at what it is not. And the only way you can do that is to not cover it up. And standards cover everything of it. It obstructs everything unless they're used situationally, like a stop sign. Or, I mean, I'm being a little bit silly, but also there's other things that show up in our health area. Don't do this. If you do that, you're going to have this kind of an issue or that kind of an issue. This is why the sitting practice of meditation is so powerful. To sit down, hold still, and watch the movement of the mind. So you're looking at the fundamental difficulty in consciousness, which is the mind that grasps, rejects, and shuts down passion, aggression, and ignorance without fixing it. Go ahead.
Bowing. So if we are stuck in some kind of habit where we're not quite letting ourselves feel as bad as we might otherwise, even if we are aware of that, are we still missing something deeper?
Say more.
Bowing. Is being really aware that you're drunk all the time less clear than being aware that you're sober?
Why'd you pick that one? That's being aware that you're drunk all the time. Let's see. What does he want to know?
We're already awake. What does it mean to not see that?
Your natural state is awakening, is Buddha nature. This is not something I invented. It's something that I'm looking at, and I was taught, was pointed at. But we cover it up. We don't, because that if we don't cover that up, then that's just too much space, and that part of the consciousness is coming from who knows where, whatever kind of source that is ego, that is fear-based, which could come from your third grade teacher, could come from any source. Parts of it come here and there and there and here. Can't find the first cause for anything. It is too complicated. This is why it is. This is why it deludes us, because it looks so real. This caused that. That's why it's necessary to see the entirety of the situation, which is an illusion. It's unreal. If it's unreal, this doesn't mean that some parts of it aren't still really intense and don't really gnaw at your jugular. We're not saying that the pain goes away necessarily. Go ahead.
Bowing. Is there a relative aspect of the path where we do need to calm down or slow down a little bit?
Again, what do you want to know?
Bowing. I'm trying to, I think, explore how we can fixate onto not improve. I'm just wondering what's an okay amount of improvement on the path.
So you want me to set up a standard? I betcha. Yeah. Only you know that. And you may know if you have a teacher, which you do, you may interact with we've been doing this since we met, talking about your particular considerations about whatever brought you here. We don't need to go into that, but we've talked about it. So it's very much different for you than it is for anyone in here. So sometimes I come in and say, do this, don't do that, stop doing this, do that. But then you might come back and say, I can't do that. I can't help but do that. And I said, well, let's take a look at it then. And then I might say, how much are you sitting? How much are you holding still and looking at how dull your butter knife is? You have to look at what it is. That is the obstruction. Much different with you than someone who doesn't have the issues you have at all, has a different kind. Theirs could have nothing to do with the issues that you have. Could be a different kind of dynamic altogether. Quite often is. But then I, as a teacher, having looked at this situation for a long time and talked to other people about their meditation practice over a long period of time and studied the Dharma with Sangha. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but I'm saying it's so very situational. But setting up any kind of a standard just kind of arbitrarily and then trying to hold on to it yourself and then expecting other people to do that too, getting upset or shunning them if they don't do things your way. In other words, believing their thoughts. Even if their thoughts have a relative accuracy to them, proves nothing. Whole world is doing that. What's that guy on Jordan Peterson? Go argue with him. He's really smart, but not that smart. He's so smart that he doesn't use his awareness. He uses his prodigious intellect. So when people are impressed by what he says and what he talks about, just like you go back and listen to any great psychologist or in the past, Bertrand Russell was also a brilliant philosopher and was very convincing. But you don't want to see a fist fight between Aristotle and Socrates because who'd win? Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. So, but that's the kind you have to answer. Sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. Further, yes.
When you're bowing, what, looking at your title and standards obstruct, could we look to in our own situation that we're obstructed by a standard?
You're obstructed by a standard if you believe your thoughts and emotions. I'm not saying stop thinking, stop emoting, but if you think they carry some kind of indisputable power, they don't. They have some power, but it's relative and it's situational. So therefore, you want to consider them, you want to feel that, you want to think that, you want to process that or work with it in some way. But don't leave what you're thinking about or feeling for what it means. As soon as you do that, then you've just canceled the whole thing out and you're starting to set up a standard. More?
When you're bowing, and then what does that obstruct?
Wisdom, clarity. The fancy ordinary word is sanity, just that you see what this is. There's no way you would ever harm someone else. I mean, without having a lot of horrible chaos going on. And then sometimes you can't help but come out and reach out at somebody else or point fingers or wave a sword or something like that. Very, very hard. Because it feels like it's true. It feels like you're correct. It feels like. And so we just want to stop it, or we want to retaliate, or we want to show that you can't treat me that way, or on and all. We can just go on. And it's how we feel. Of course, it has a truth to it, but it's not, it's relatively true. And relative truth is powerful. Fire burns. Earth is hard. Wind moves. What's the other one? Water gets things wet. Water is not wet, according to Ani, whose birthday is today. Yes.
When you're bowing, so in a community such as our Sangha, is there a way that, what is the responsibility of our Sangha to the culture that we live in terms of standards?
Get out of trouble. what do you want? Let's tell me what you want to know. I see where you're going with it, but we can't have a conversation about it. This is a Dharma talk. I can respond to questions. If you can clarify the question,
It has to, when you're bowing, it has to do with responsibility.
okay, what is responsibility? Is it blame?
I
Is it-
think the way you define it is it's the ability to respond.
It is. And if you disagree, then we're not going to have some kind of a debate about it.
When you're bowing, no, I'm thinking more broadly, collectively, as our public face to the community that we are in. Do we have a particular responsibility in terms of standards?
To pretend that we're a certain kind of way and so that we won't offend the community? No. We don't. People are going to project onto you or me, certainly do with me, probably do with you too in a different way. You're going to do that. There's no way you can avoid that. This is why a lot of times monasteries have such strong, stringent rules so that they don't even get into that. You can't even blame anybody. They're all celibate and they don't eat any food after noon and all of those cultural things. This is a different kind of monastery. I want to have men and women all ordained as monks, and I want to have children, or I want this to be a family situation if possible. I don't know of a monastery that has children in it, other than just randomly or accidentally. But I want this. I want it to be a family situation where people who are working or in society can also have spent some time training their mind, and possibly their children could be raised in an area where that's emphasized from an early age. But there's no way our situation is pretty heartbreaking, but there's no way I can have somebody come to me and look at something that I've done, or they've heard rumors that I've done, because no one actually knows what's happening over here. I'm like a big screen. People project onto this teacher and come up with conclusions, especially if there's a lot of fear going on. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have rule. We do. This monastery has, I don't want to go into those right now, but we have very, very definite rules about relating to each other. And they're standards, but they're not to be obeyed, they're to be observed. So each situation has so many changes in it, so many modifications in it. You get outside of this, then you've got all of the people out there that are looking for something to project onto and blame or make responsible.
Or be inspired by.
Or be inspired by. Yes, totally. Further about that, it's a good area to ask, and it's difficult to not go into some kind of history about stuff, and it's just not worth it. We're doing the best we can. My intention here is to help you train your mind. If you give me permission, I'll try to do that. But I can't promise you that I will be comfortable to be around 24/7. If I know that you've asked me to help you see what your obstructions are. Yes, sir.
In long bowing. What is the nature of our responsibility to the lineage?
Well, study. And if I consider myself and am a Buddhist monk and student of Buddhism, student of the Buddhist Dharma. I've done the best I can over the years to study that and to try to, sometimes I think some of the teachings in Buddhism are a little bit off the mark. I'm not going to list any, but there's so many that are just very different ways of interpreting what the Buddha and different ways of talking about what the Buddha said. Some of them are just astonishing. And so, as far as responsibility, I would say, let's all study that. We study Dogen, we study Vasubandhu, we study Nagarjuna, we study all different Zen masters, and we study contemporary teachers. We study contemporary scholars. Bill Waldron is someone we've been studying who's a contemporary scholar, and we studied Jeremy Hopkins throw out his books. We studied, well, I don't know, I could go on. Maybe I'm going the wrong direction with what you're asking.
Bowing. It's in line with Munio's question. For example, if I'm wearing regular clothes, I don't consider myself an ambassador or representative, but if right now I walk down the street wearing this, I'd be a little bit more self-conscious about my behavior because I'm representing something other than just myself.
Okay,
So when we have normal drama here at the Sangha that I don't expect not to have, I worry about how much that gets broadcast to the greater community and less about whether or not they judge us and more about whether we're doing a disservice to the lineage if they
Yeah,
make a judgment about, oh, Buddhists are all crazy. I don't want to learn anything about that.
I understand what you're saying. And in ancient times, monks went to the mountaintop. They didn't wander in society much, especially in China. Somewhat in Japan, but definitely in China, they would just go way up high in the mountains. And monasteries were quite often built a long ways away from society, separate rules and laws. A different situation here, and this is a kind of a hybrid of coming together of the Zen tradition, as I understand it, and the Tibetan tradition, as I understand it, was taught. So I think it's good to bring that together. It's kind of choiceless for me to do that. But I think, a lot of what we're doing here, we have, just like we had a talk here a little while ago, or a discussion that was involved, a couple dozen people altogether probably, but suddenly there's 100 people on there online, all listening to this, have no idea. They have no idea what, they don't have the experience of being here and living here. And so is that what you're addressing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I don't know. We can look more closely at how we do that. Like, we haven't thought of it in the not too recent past of just shutting this down and just training monks here. And so one of the ideas was to train monks here, and then over here in the Community Mindfulness Center is to have more general society come and do mindfulness training or whatever they want. They can also come over here and do the so-called heavy lifting. We set 8 hours a day for a month, like we did in the month of February. I call that heavy lifting. It's difficult work to spend your whole day doing nothing but watching the mind come and go. More.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Chisho.
Tishabawing, in response to Unio and also to Inlong just now, you were mentioning that people are casting rumors or whatever.
Yes.
But the March 6th session stopped that rumor. It made it real. It made it a fact. So I don't think there is any rumor being slung on you or on the Sangha because after March 7th session. My question is, when we
I
say
can't wait. Go ahead.
when we say no standards, do we mean that the Sangha can be or should be at the lowest possible behavior of the society, Bhavin, in which it's living, Bhavin?
That's not what I intended. So, but you're using the idea of levels, and I'm saying each individual person, your karma, there's no way you can be anyone but Chisho or Bhaskar. There's no way you can be some other person. Your causes and conditions from the time you're born till now have a certain kind of structure to them. Your conditioning as you were raised in India, you just can't. It's totally different than anyone else here. Not better, not worse, just different. So this is true of everyone here. Everyone's coming from an incredible. You have a question already? Go ahead.
Tishabawing, I agree that my upbringing is different, but for example, I lived for 20 years in Houston, and there was any clash, so to say, between the way I was brought up and a large community that I lived in was pretty consistent. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that there are no criminals in Houston. I'm not saying that. But my question is, when we say don't hold any standards, are we suggesting that we go to, like I said, uh, yeah, for me, the lowest possible or anything goes would be no standards. But
I didn't, when it says don't set up, in the teaching, it says don't set up standards. It's talking about setting them up. Setting them up, like you set up a standard or you hold a standard. So I'm not saying do away with standards. I'm saying, as I say about everything, I'm saying observe the standard. And it may be a standard that you particularly want to align with, maybe not obey, but you find yourself that's a natural area that you seem to be harmonizing or in the same frequency as that standard. And then someone else, because of the causes and conditions that are arising in their mind stream, even though they're a practitioner, even though they're studying the Buddha's Dharma, even though they're meditating a lot, they can't just decide not to function this way or to function that way. This is a big illusion, thinking you have any control. And this is when I start to get irritated about, and sometimes I yell, and then so I get, because I'm supposed to live up to a standard of being a peaceful, kind, loving Buddhist monk or something like that. I am not. And if you're looking for one, look elsewhere. I'm not trying to scare you away. I want you, if you want my help, I'm looking at what you probably are looking for. There's no guarantee. But the way in which I'm saying is you can't just suddenly think or generally think or casually think that you have some kind of say-so about this. I'm not saying you can't pick this up and put it down. I'm not talking about something like that. But I'm saying that the areas that sometimes we even say to ourselves, I have to get control of myself. Not a good idea to talk to yourself that way. It's a good idea to do what? Look at the way you have no control, please. And with you particularly, Jisho, or maybe many other people who have a natural sense of the traditional idea of capital D discipline, you just can control yourself. You live in a family with lots of people, some children, some siblings are just very naturally controlled. They just are born that way. Others are just outlandishly crazy and spinning around and creating chaos in the kitchen, in the bedroom, fighting with their siblings. And when they leave home, they keep right on doing that in society. So you cannot just lay this on anyone. I mean, you can, but the important thing that I'm here to promote, if you want to say it at all, is to train your mind to see clearly so you can see what this is, not control what you think this is, because you're not controlling what this is. If you see what this is, you see you can't control it. You can't control something you are not separate from. You can only control something that's over there, and you can control it. You can control it. You can control it. And then your life comes to an end, and what did you have? A life of controlling things. And what is the next lifetime about? I'm not saying there is one. It's about more control, very similar kind of hot knobs and handles and buttons. Circular, circular, circular. The illusion is progress. There is no progress. I'm not saying that they didn't invent transistor radios in the 1960s. Of course they did. No control. So I feel like I've gone away from your original question, Chisho, into my particular dithyrambic expenditure, but I'm happy to return to what it is that you were asking about and see if I can't do some justice to it.
Ishwang, yeah, I don't have the right question, I guess, but my struggle is not having any standards. To me, it means being like I said, the accumulation of all the worst possible.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. And I would say, if you ask me, am I ethical? I would say I'm ethical, but I'm situationally ethical. I'm not ethical living up to a standard of ethics. There's a teaching, Bonhoeffer talked about situation ethics back in the early part of the previous century. So not the same as Buddhism, but had some similarities to it. It's about whatever the situation is, then you can see whether you should run the red light or not. Then you can see whether you should help this person or not help this person, or perhaps mind your own business. So I think that this is why, as Buddhist practitioners of the Buddhist Dharma, in which you receive the Bodhisattva vow, which is a very, very difficult vow for the ego to stand aside and actually intend to help others, intend to save other beings. And one of the ways you do that is to not interfere with them when you can see that what they need to do, rather than you need to control them or help them in a way that they are not even asking for, let alone give you permission to do. So I'm not about ignoring the standards. I'm saying you can have a standard. It's just not about obeying it. It's about observing it. Just like the vow to be with all things, or the intention to see the truth yourself, the intention to do good, not do harm, and be with all things, the threefold pure precepts. Shoto.
Sort of bowing, how does holding to a standard, how might that be unethical? Bowing.
Well, what's the 10th grave precept?
No abusing the three treasures.
Can you know what they are? What is it?
No asceticism is no abusing the Buddha. No standpoint is no abusing the Dharma.
No standpoint. That's not something I invented. No standpoint. That's part of the 16 precepts, part of the 10. That's very difficult. You have to do that with your consciousness. You can't figure that out. No standpoint. What's that about? Not having any standpoint. When you stumble over a log, no standpoint. There's a log. That's a standpoint. But what does that mean? What does it mean for you? No standpoint. You've been practicing for a few years.
As you're talking about it, it means open your eyes and look, and don't just believe your thoughts before you get into a situation.
That's a very good way of saying it. Just each situation, ego does not want to not have a protection about how I'm going to function, how I'm going to act. What if this happens? What if that happens? If she comes in and says this, what will I say to her? Allow yourself to give yourself what? Some room. You don't have to succeed. You can actually be a fool. I'm a fool every day. I came out of what do they call it? Asphyxiation? What do they call that?
Euthanasia.
Huh?
Euthanasia.
I came out of euthanasia, and I was teaching the Dharma. Really, wasn't I?
Yes.
I was, before I even come out of consciousness, I'm talking about not having standards. And I'm preaching to the people that were around me, which were the hospital. Quite funny. And Unyo said she was embarrassed because I sounded like a Sunday preacher. And of course I
As a
am.
British monk.
And then she misunderstood the word Buddhist monk and thought I said British monk. Well, that protected me a little bit, because that way they don't blame the Americans. Yes.
Jude bowing. Not long ago, you said something like all energy is sexual energy. Something
I
like
said that everything's sexual. Anything that's happening has a sexual dynamic to it. Yes. But not the lusting kind of thing. It's just has a sexual energy to it.
That's what I'm confused about. If I'm not walking around trying to have intercourse with everyone,
No.
what do you mean by sexual?
I don't mean that. Why did you jump to that?
Because that seems to be what sexual means.
Yeah, it doesn't to me.
So what do you mean by sexual?
It just means that everything is connected in different ways through polarities. Male and female is a powerful polarity, much different than the polarity of life and death, but a similarity to it. Very, very similar. This is addressed in the tantric teachings extensively. But it isn't addressed in a conceptual way. It is done through the practices, the creation completion practices there. It's not something you can really think about, because then it turns into some kind of sexual situation. More of this, if you have the question, other than just what do you mean by that? If you can do it a little bit more, help me with it.
How when I think of, angry energy, there's some sort of pushing or trying to go after something. If I think of,
You're in that, that's the area I'm talking about. It's grasping, rejecting. I mean, that whole area is very, very sexual. I'm not just saying the conventional situation. Everyone's trying to, in the world, is trying to get some kind of a handle on or understanding of what that all that sexual energy is, because it's very powerful.
so when you say sexual, do you just mean
Not talking about intercourse, no.
some sort of relational, like there's always some sort of relationship?
Pulling away, grasping, seducing, magnetizing. Some people might not have much of an interest in sex, but they, in the conventional sense, but they're very much interested in seducing you and controlling you. Magnetizing you into, so they can control you.
So why would you use the word sexual instead of grasping or controlling?
More interesting. Got you to ask a question about it. So obviously not, it's not graphically that way, but the energy is still there and it's powerful. And it's something we put aside, and culturally, it's just a, you know, if you have a interaction with somebody else that is your business, society finds out about it. If you're not doing it exactly the way society thinks that you should, then you will get ostracized because you're not doing it the way they think you should. Whereas in other culture, it's done a completely different way. You follow me a little bit?
I feel very confused.
That's good. That's called awareness. Yes.
So allowing, I'm curious to go the other way, where when we do look at stuff like scientifically, stuff kind of does look really sexual. Like when you look at plants, like the way that they communicate with each other is really sticky and syrupy and almost pornographic if you look at it in that way. So what is, like, we're from sex, we're from food. Why is that so taboo?
I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about it. I'm not ready to give a talk on it, maybe next week. But there's an area there that we just don't want to look at. We don't want to look closely at it. So, but maybe we can as we go along. So I'll maybe take one more question on Zoom. Not you, Jishin. Unless somebody else, if nobody else has a question, then I'll take your question. Okay, Jishin, go ahead.
Bowing. Is it a standard you just set out for me? One question per talk. Now my question is about that sexual energy. Are you talking about attraction?
Yeah, yes, attraction and seduction and pushing and pulling and like Jodo was talking about, there's just all kinds of things going on that are repelling and pushing back and forth. I mean, I could go on and on here, but I don't want to go on and on in that direction. Maybe a talk at some point we could do that. And no, I'm not setting up a standard for you, my dear. You quite often get to ask all kinds of questions, don't you? You get a lot of chance to ask questions. But you're right. I did set up one for you just temporarily, but I immediately got scolded, so I took it down.
Thank you. It was a joke. Bye.
I know. I realize that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So bowing, you had a study of the sutra, I believe it's the Sokuzan that line comes out of, don't set up standards. And what I noticed is that's the only translation I came across that leaves out the last part. Don't set up standards of your own. With that extra bit, what is that?
Yeah, well, that's, well, set up standards of your own. It's pretty obvious. Like you think things should be this way. It's sometimes called an opinion or fixation or something like that. but it could have all kinds of emotional heat behind it that just makes it seem real. Unless you have a strong meditation practice, you won't be able to even observe that. You'll just, like an opinion, you just think it's right. You just think it's the way you vote or who you like, and prejudiced against people of different sexual orientation or skin color or ethnicity and everything. It's just, with a lot of people, that's just how it is. They never investigate that at all. That kind of thing. As meditators, we should investigate every single bit of that, including all the sexual stuff, if you can. We'll set up standards. Right and wrong are just extra. They get in the way. If you want to realize your true nature, if this 2,500 year teaching of anything you've studied, which probably is in the dozens, if not hundreds of pieces of material that keep saying the same thing over and over. If you want to understand this, and you think there's a right and the wrong, and you just think that that's true, then that actually is preventing you from seeing your true nature. Because your true nature is way beyond that. But the fear that shows up in that part of the consciousness we call ego, or the klesha mind, the seventh consciousness, according to the Yogacara tradition, doesn't want that kind of openness. It wants to have some kind of containment where I'm right, you're wrong, or maybe I'm not always right, but quite often I'm right. I mean, there's quite a bit of equanimity going on there. Egalitarianism, I guess they call it. Well, it's just not funny. It's harmful. It's harmful. We've seen it in our community. It's just terrible when you believe your thoughts and emotions about something based on something that is not true. I mean, it has some relative truth to it, but not very much. Just a little bit, yes.
If we're perceiving conduct that's either above or below our conduct, what is that covering up?
The right and wrong part. Yeah, go ahead.
Is everyone functioning at the lowest conduct possible?
But the whole idea of low and high, it's like Jisho was talking about. It's not that that's not there. It's not that someone who is functioning in one way, another person's functioning in another way, you could go in and attribute to each person that one seems to be at a very high level. They never hurt anybody. They're always kind. They're always helping people, and they don't. I mean, I could go on and on. You know what I mean? They're highly, in the classical sense, highly ethical. This does not mean they're awake, or that particular activity won't actually prevent them from awakening, because it is so extremely secure for ego. It's secure. Ego is just right. Can't help it, but I just right about stuff. Whereas someone at the other end of the pole is might be going the other way, thinking how terrible they are, how wrong they are, how they're never going to get anything right, and they can't live up to anything, and they have no control over their karma because they are they're refusing their life. This doesn't mean they should receive their karma and start murdering people, but they could be responsible for the emotions that arise of wanting to take someone else's life. You don't have to actually do it. Go ahead.
So Bowing, is ethics a bad translation of Sheila? Bowing.
As soon as you say it, you've translated it. However it is, I don't know if I'd go to bad, especially after what I just said. If I came back and said, yeah, that's bad. That's bad. That's wrong. That's just not wrong. Thanks for helping me with that. Okay. What do they call that?
Talk to them.
I've talked to them. I think I get shut up now. Chisho, did you have a final question?
Kishwaving, no, I thought Shoto's question about Sheila was spot on. Sheila is not so much about conduct of rule of conduct. It is more about behaving properly in a society. That is what Sheila is. It's behaving properly. It is not obeying rules and obeying laws. That's what do you call, either a given or it's not even under consideration. But Sheila really means observing, like I said, norms, the subtle areas of norms. It's not, do not kill is not Sheila. Do not lie is not a Sheila. But if there is a situation and the way they conduct themselves, that is Sheila. And that is invariably judged by others. Bhavin.
Very good. Thank you so much. I think I'll end with what you just said. Thank you, thank you, thank you.